Eli Campbell here. One thing that makes Steamboat special is how many awe-inspiring people call our valley home. You could find yourself in line at the coffee shop next to an Olympian, or sitting on the gondola next to the founder of a world-renowned business. Our community produces and attracts the best of the best in their respective fields, but most are so humble about it you would never know. These extraordinary people are the common folk in the boat. Welcome to Common Folk in the Boat. Eli Campbell here with you. Dave Whitlinger, how are you doing today?
I'm peachy.
It's been a minute. You know, we haven't done one of these since before Christmas. So
the holidays.
Yeah, how did your holidays go?
I put on a few extra pounds.
Yeah.
You know, lots of cookies.
Yeah. Well,
neighbors. We have a neighborhood swap, and we make cookies, we give them out, and then we end up getting 3 times as many cookies in.
Your resolution is just to get rid of the cookies.
Well, I end up eating them all because I just want them gone.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds a weird way to solve that problem, but I eat 3 times as many cookies that I should.
Yeah.
Because I don't want them.
You don't want to go to waste either. So.
No, I hate wasting food.
Well, we should point out we are in a different location here. Steph at Dusky Grouse has been extremely nice to us to let us use her little back room, but she's got so much going on here. She double booked it. She's got other groups. She does so much for the community and has the best coffee, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to give her a quick shout out, but say we're kind of in a little small office space here at Dusky today, and I think this will work well. We're going to have a nice intimate conversation with Ben Berend, former U.S. Olympian, Nordic combined athlete, now realtor here in Steamboat.
And hockey player.
Which it speaks your language.
I know. I hate to say it. I've turned into at least in the wintertime, I've turned into a hockey player. Yeah. So I see him at the rink a lot.
Yeah, you don't even have time to ski because you're trying to
I might get injured. I don't want to get injured. Yeah. Gotta keep that ice time.
Well, before we get to Ben and talking about U.S. Nordic combined, of course, we want to see what's Billo high on. What's making you excited as we're moving into this new year?
Boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot to talk about. The one thing I'll bring up, and I hate to kind of give a product plug, but it's worthwhile. We recently launched a new product of our own, the Billo Sleep Gummies. And I'll tell you, for people that struggle with getting to sleep and staying asleep and don't want to go the Ambien or some prescription route, I'll tell you, these sleep gummies have turned into a lifesaver for a lot of people. And for a fact, back to the hockey analogy, it's just funny because adult hockey and Steamboat, we get the worst times, right? I mean, there's only X number of hours in a day that you can schedule ice. And so the adults play very late at night. I'm not lying when I say some of my games don't start until 10:30 at night, which means it's 11:30 at night when I'm done. I'm jacked up. I've got all sorts of adrenaline because I just played a sport and I need to get to sleep because it's a school night. And so I've been handing out the sleep gummies to my teammates, if you will, and other players, and rave reviews. It's a 1-to-1 ratio of THC with CBD and CBN. And it's an amazing product. So I'm pretty high on that right now.
Well, can you speak?
Not specifically now.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have a good interview here. I don't want you to fall asleep during it.
I didn't bring a pillow.
But can you speak to, though, like, I understand Ambien, it becomes habit forming. Melatonin is another non-habit forming, but I've tried to use that before. And after a while, it just doesn't seem to have the same effect. It doesn't work. Can you talk a little bit more about what you've gotten, the benefits?
My personal experience with any THC sleep product is going to, and this is just me, my experience is it can be similar to melatonin, where if I did it every night, it would probably have less effect or I'd need more. But the way that I've been using this product is I know the next day I've got a busy day and I need my solid, 7-8 hours of sleep, whatever that is. Then I'll pop one before I go to bed, about an hour before I go to actual beddy bye time. And then I drift
Betty
right.
Bye, I like that.
I got kids, yeah.
You've got a high school. I'm sure he'd love to.
I snuggle in. What can I say? Yeah. I get my little blankie. Anyway, for me, I don't use it every night, but man, when I know I need to get a good solid night's sleep, or if I need to get to sleep like pretty quickly here, wind down quickly, like after a late night, activity, for sure that's when they come into play.
And there's no effect the next morning.
I've never had any. I always feel actually refreshed. I don't feel hungover. I don't feel any of the lingering. In fact, I will say, I don't know if you could hear my voice, I'm getting over a cold. Man, I needed some NyQuil the other night, and I took that at like 10 o'clock at night, and I still felt super goofy in the morning. And this is like an over-the-counter drug, and I would much prefer something natural, plant-based, like what we're selling at Bill. So long story short, man, I get less residuals from the THC, the sleep gummies, if you will, than I ever did from like even NyQuil or like anything sleep aid that way. Yeah. Well,
and hopefully that sleep helps you perform better on the ice, because from what I understand, Ben's team, who we're going to be talking to, has a bye in the playoffs. It sounds like maybe your team does not.
Full disclosure, he's on the Billo team. So he's on the Billo C team, and that team's doing really well.
All right.
I don't play on that team, but they're doing really well. Our Billo B team, not so great.
Not
story for another time.
Not playoff bye material. But all right. Well, it's always fun to talk to locals who have grown up here, who can really talk to appreciating the community from the time they were in grade school through their professional career. And that's what we're going to get here with Ben Berend, Olympian and real estate agent here in town. We're going to bring him in here, and we'll be right back on Common Folk in the Boat. Welcome back to Common Folk in the Boat. We are happy to be joined by Ben Berend now. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Now, I think this is really cool. You're a native of Steamboat. You've grown up here. You're a former Olympian here. You know the kind of Olympic heritage that this town has, but not as one of those athletes that trained from somewhere else and came to the Winter Sports Club, someone that grew up seeing it from a very young age. Can you just start by talking a little bit about your youngest days in the Winter Sports Club and what it was to you? Was it just like a place where your parents were sending you after school, or was it like
daycare?
Was it like an actual dream at a young age to do something with it?
Yeah, it's I try to think of my first earliest memory down in Howelsen. That's where I learned to ski, of course.
Yeah.
But I remember, like, the memory I always talk about is we used to have the Nordic Combined World Cups in town. And the whole school would get out on a field trip, and every school, the students would walk down to Howelsen to go watch the event. And I was in kindergarten, and I remember like getting out of school and walking from Soda Creek down to Howelsen and watching these athletes from all over the world ski jumping, in my backyard. And all the American athletes were from Steamboat. And I just was hooked on that. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so I came home that day and I told my mom, like, you got to sign me up for this. So that was
as a kindergartner.
Yeah. I was
pretty demanding.
I was just like,
I love
it.
This
is what I want to do. And so pretty much from like that day, I was just completely hooked on it. And so, yeah, it was like daycare. That's where I'd go after school. I spent like probably my whole childhood down there.
Yeah. Now, was there a moment where, you had this dream to be like those guys that you saw as a kindergartner? Was there a moment or a specific coach that kind of inspired you to think like, this isn't just a dream, this could become a reality? You have what it takes to be competing at that international level.
Yeah. I don't know if I ever had a moment where I think as I got further along, I actually started to doubt it more. Like earlier on, it was like a guarantee, but I think that's just the product of that environment. Like if you spend a bunch of time as a kid down in Howelsen and you're looking up at the flags on the ceiling and like everything tells you like that's totally achievable.
Yeah.
And so I think like as a kid, I just thought like, I didn't even second guess it. I'm like, of course I'm going to go do this because all these other people have. And then as I got older, I realized like this is like a big dream, like bigger than I think I realized at that age. It just seemed normal, right?
Well, you had the benefit though of watching people like Todd Lodwick and Jonny Spillane, who kind of really put a huge emphasis on Nordic Combine in America on the international stage.
but doing so from Steamboat, you had kind of that inspiration coming up just below them in age. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to have those guys in the same program, being coached by some of the same coaches, and really seeing that inspiration?
Yeah, I think if you look at like the pieces that have to come together, right, to like get to that place, it's having the belief, but it's like comes from having those role models. And like I think if I didn't have those role models to look up to, I honestly don't know if it all happens, right?
Yeah.
Because that was just what kept me so fired up all those years, like watching them. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to like watch those guys competing in Europe when I was like a teenager, right? Like I was just obsessed with it. And I think they like totally paved that pathway. And they kept the sport really relevant, like to be quite honest with their results and what they were doing, especially in our little town. Like to me, this was the biggest sport in the world, right? Just because I was here and I didn't know any differently. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said to that. You know, you hear the story of the 4-minute mile, how everyone said it couldn't be done, and then somebody does it, and all of a sudden everyone's able to break that 4-minute barrier. When you're able to see someone do it, and especially people that are coming from the same place that you're coming from, it's got to help. Now, you mentioned, though, kind of how here in Steamboat, you have the flags in Olympian Hall. You're kind of primed to see that it's possible because all of these people have done it before you. Do you ever take a moment to go through Olympian Hall now that you have been to the Olympics, to kind of look at that flag that has your name on it and reflect where you've come from to where you were able to get to?
Yeah, I go up there a ton because I lead the Olympic Heritage Tours down at Howelsen in the summertime. And so part of our tour, we go out to the ski jumps and we talk about all the history down there, and we end up in Olympian Hall. And so kind of at the end of the tour, I get to show people, like, look at all these flags on the ceiling. And I think Olympian Hall is something that I, like, just grew up and got so used to. But if you take people that have, like, never been to Steamboat or hardly even been into the mountains, and you tell them about our Olympic heritage, and then you take them up to Olympian Hall, like, you should see their reactions, right? Like, we all have been in that room a million times, but, like, to see people's first perspective of that, I mean, it puts you in their shoes of like, yeah, this is not normal. This is like such a special thing that's unique to our town. But I remember, like, cause I grew up, like, before our Wednesday night jump, our like youth ski jumping competitions, we'd like be eating pizza and drinking soda in Olympian Hall. And
the dinner of champions.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, like memorizing all the flags on the ceiling. And, I think that was like the coolest thing. The first time that I came back to Steamboat after the Olympics and I saw my flag on the wall, was like, I kind of had forgotten about that like aspect of it, and then walked into that room and saw my flag on the wall, and I was like, it was a very special moment for me. Yeah.
I think
I'm sorry, do they do any sort of ceremony? I've never heard of that. Or do they just order the flag and it's up?
They just
do it in the dark of night.
They just totally throw it up. Exactly.
The next tour you give, oh my gosh, there I am.
Yeah, exactly. And they're always moving around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it's like a Where's Waldo of Where's Your Flag?
Yeah, because like every 4 years there's 20 more Olympians, so they move everything, right?
Oh man.
But it is an interesting aspect I think you speak to, is kind of, we do take it for granted. One of my favorite marketing campaigns that Steamboat Resort put out was back during the 2002 Olympics. They said something about like, when world-class athletes gather in Utah, it's called the Olympics. When they do it in Steamboat, it's called Tuesday. Yeah, exactly. I've always loved that. But it does, I mean, it goes to, I was a Winter Sports Club athlete being coached by people whose flags were on that ceiling, and never thought twice about it until you take a step back and realize what that really means. Now, for you, it was the 2018 Olympics. What about those games? Was there anything like real special that you remember about those games, whether it was the support that you had from the community from afar, or just a new experience that you had there that was really special to you?
Yeah, I think kind of my story around those games was like, I barely made those games. So like my lead up to the Olympics was definitely not like locked into the team, like, you know, just preparing to compete well at the games. It was like trying to make the games. And so it was, I think my memory around it was just all the support that I had back home. And that was like what kind of kept me going through that was knowing I was like right on that edge. And I just kept hearing from people back home, you know, friends and family, like cheering me on and like crossing their fingers for me basically as I kind of navigated like being right on the cusp of making that team. And so it was a roller coaster, and I felt like those people were like all along with me. Yeah. And no matter what would have happened, right? Like if I would have missed the team, like they would have supported me the same no matter what. But it was cool to get to then like actually go and have those people be able to see me like put that bib on.
Yeah. I mean, the community support around here is huge. And, you know, we talk about Nordic combined and you and before you, Jonny and Todd, but you go back 100 years into this community, and it was Carl Howelsen who brought ski jumping to Steamboat. And the reason that we have a winter sports club here, there's an argument that could be made that without ski jumping being an influence, our winter sports club wouldn't have been as strong as it is to send more Olympians to the Winter Olympics than any other small town or any other town in the nation. And now here we are, we're sitting in a place where Nordic combined is actually seeing some struggles, and the future is a little bit in jeopardy. Can you talk a little bit about, as a former athlete and someone who knows how influential it's been to your life and to this community, about what's going on with Nordic combined right now?
Yeah. And, you know, I think it's one of those things, and talking about the landscape of Nordic combined, I mean, essentially right now there is, it's the only Olympic sport that's not gender neutral or gender equitable. So it has, you know, there's only men's Nordic combined in the Olympics. There's no women's Nordic combined. They have a women's World Cup. They have women's World Championships. They basically have everything you need to have an Olympic sport, but they don't have the IOC's approval, right? And so that has become kind of something that's basically pulled Nordic combined out and put it in a box where, you know, I think a lot of people say, well, it's a pretty easy decision to bring the women in and grow the sport, but there is some discussion that the IOC is just going to get rid of it altogether. I don't know how true any of that is or when those decisions are made, but that has essentially been part of the thought process, and it's kind of rallied our community about like we can't let this sport, you know, fade away. And then as far as the US team, it's kind of two parts, right? It's the sport internationally. You know, if you lose the Olympics, you're all of a sudden going to lose a bunch of athletes, because all those athletes are competing in ski jumping and cross country skiing, which both are Olympic sports. So if all of a sudden you lose the Olympic Games, then essentially the sport, in my opinion, is going to start to lose its skill level because athletes will go to those other sports. And so that's a huge important thing. But then the U.S. team, essentially, and this has kind of been a tale as old as time, is the U.S. ski team. When I made the U.S. ski team in 2014, that was the year they cut Nordic combined from the U.S. ski team funding. So what happened was we had to create our own organization to raise funds and be a nonprofit that can basically support athletes' training, competition, and that paired with ski jumping, because ski jumping had been cut from the U.S. ski team years ago. I forget what year it was, but essentially ski jumping got cut, Nordic combined stayed in, and then they cut Nordic combined as well. And then they created ski jumping Nordic combined USA Nordic. And that organization was run by Billy DeMong, Olympic gold medalist, and basically got to a point where we were better funded than, you know, the U.S. ski team athletes, right? Yeah. Like I was at the Olympics with the alpine racing, with the alpine racers, and they're like, yeah, we had to pay to get here. You know, we had to like purchase our flights to get here or whatever. I just remember thinking like, wow, we're better off than the Alpine team now. And then this year the big change was that USA Nordic decided that they were going to cut Nordic combined and just be a ski jumping organization. And that was a big shock to kind of the whole community, where these two sports had basically been, you know, hand in hand together, kind of as like these outliers that had built this great path. And you know, all the athletes know each other, all the competitions are in the same places. Like, those two sports are very tightly knit in the US. And then all of a sudden there was this huge divide of, okay, now we're just ski jumping, Nordic combined, good luck. And so now it's kind of 2014 all over again, right? All right, well, let's create an organization, let's raise funds, let's create a pathway forwards so that we can support these athletes on this level. And they've done a great job. I mean, they've raised the money that they need to basically support a world-class Nordic combined team for a season on the World Cup and Continental Cup, with not a lot of time to do so. And so, yeah, it's just another one of those processes. And that's like what I told everyone when it happened, was like, yeah, it seems like a bad situation, but we've been here before, right? And there's always going to be something good that comes out of that. And I think that they're seeing that, like, you know, being able to represent themselves and do things the way they want to do it. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of changes for sure. And it'll be interesting. You know, I think it's just continuing to rally support around like this sport that's so critical to our town's history. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because I saw a young, great athletic female who was in Nordic Combine, and because there was no path forward for her after a certain point, she decided to move away and is competing now in mountain biking and doing a great job. But it's that story of you're losing the best athletes. And I don't think that a lot of people really recognize that, because one of those big points of the Olympic Games is equality through athletics, right?
100%.
Whether it's male, female, or across countries. And so as a male who was growing up in Nordic combined training alongside females who were probably just as qualified to take it further, what were you able to do, or how were you able to kind of reckon with being in that place where it's like, yeah, this person, this friend of mine isn't going to have this opportunity?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's kind of, it's crazy to reflect on that, like growing up in this sport that wasn't gender equal. And what I saw was, like, to your point, all these amazing female athletes basically at a certain point all switching over to other sports and being super successful in them. And I think, like, what we can do is you know, vie for their future. Like, that has to be the most important, you know, first step. And, you know, it's kind of crazy. I don't understand, you know, Nordic combine has been in the Olympics since the first Winter Olympics in Chamonix. And, you know, I think people ask me all the time, like, well, why has it taken this long? Like, why are we even talking about this now? Like, why did this not happen a long, long time ago? And I think kind of the answer is that because it didn't exist, there was no pathway forwards. And so the IOC's reasoning for not having women's Nordic combined in the past has been that the level's not high enough for them to have a television-worthy product. And the reason is because the athletes are choosing other sports because there's no pathway. So they're essentially shooting themselves in the foot. They're getting what they asked for by...
It's a chicken and egg problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And if they brought it in, then it raises the whole... And the same thing happened with women's ski jumping. Women's ski jumping was... first Winter Olympics was 2014. So, you know, 10 years ago. And so the fact that women's Nordic combined didn't follow directly after... It's unacceptable.
And as someone that's been paying attention, have you seen the increase in the performance of the women's ski jumpers because they've been given that opportunity? Oh yeah, and I watched it firsthand because I was competing during that time frame, and you know, in ski jumping and Nordic combined, you know, there's only so many ski jumps around the world, right? And so when we were training over in Europe, you'd have, you know, 3 or 4 different nationalities of teams
training at the same place, right? So maybe it's the Americans and the Canadians and the Austrians and the Norwegians are all at the same jump on the same day, right? And you're kind of always gauging each other, you know, basically when you're ski jumping, you have 20 to 30 different gates where you can select your speed. And the higher the gate, the more speed you have, the easier it is to jump further. And so typically like younger or less experienced athletes need more speed. And so you're gauging people by, you know, am I going from the same speed as this guy, right? Yeah. Or this woman? And what we watched happen is we'd be out training and these women ski jumpers, you know, who maybe when we were first skiing with them were jumping from 3, 4, 5 gates higher than us. By the time I retired in 2018, the Nordic combined team, we would be like training on a hill and the women's ski jumpers would be going like 4 gates below us. And we'd be like, oh my gosh, just like watching them jump, like they're just incredible.
Yeah.
And so we watched that progression happen like in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're talking about training internationally in Europe. The sport has had a much bigger following there. I've heard some athletes talk about almost like a NASCAR type of atmosphere at competitions when you're in Europe. Why? What do we need to do here to build that sort of? Is it, you know, start from the local communities up? Is it what is it that has allowed that progression overseas, but we haven't seen that same thing here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's really about just having competitions. I mean, we don't have that level of competition anymore. Like I said, like when I was a kid, we'd walk down and we'd watch the World Cup down at Howelsen Hill.
Yeah.
I don't know what year it was the last time we had a World Cup, but it's been a really long time. So I think it's having that happening. It's also on television every weekend over there. So like, you know, Eurosport, which is their sports center, every weekend it's just skiing. That's all that's on. You know, there'll be some soccer mixed in there, but it's pretty much it's alpine, biathlon, ski jumping, and Nordic combined like every weekend. So it's in front of people all the time. And I think like, you know, our media doesn't pick up skiing sports the way that Europe's media does. And so, you know, you're always trying to find different ways to watch it. And I think it's gotten way better. Like when I was a kid, I was like streaming Nordic Combine on sketchy websites, like getting computer viruses. And I had to watch it in real time, right? I had to wake up at like 2 in the morning.
You can only imagine your parents, what are you doing in there? Oh, nothing. It's just skiing.
Yeah, exactly. And but nowadays, like you can subscribe to, you know, like US Ski and Snowboard has a stream app and you can watch all that stuff, like replayed versions. And so what I've been just telling people is like reminding people like tune into it, right? I think that we've kind of gotten away from like being in touch with these sports where these athletes are coming out of our town and like really like I've been asking people like when's the last time you watched a Nordic combine competition?
Yeah.
And most people here, even in Steamboat, like it was probably like when the Continental Cups were here, you know, live, you know, a few years back. But like, when's the last time you actually like went and watched an international competition on your computer or television? And I think people are like, oh, I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been what I've been passing along to people is like, tune into it, like go check it out. And the coolest part is you're going to see 4 or 5 kids from Steamboat or that were kids in Steamboat, you know, now adults competing on the World Cup level. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I understand, and you may or may not know the answer, but when these decisions are made to say cut Nordic combined from U.S. funding or cut women's Nordic combined from the Olympics, are these decisions being made because of popularity and call it media buys, or is it some other reason? Because I think we can probably all agree, and I'm not a Nordic guy myself, but I can respect the level of athleticism it takes. So I don't think we're arguing that it's not an athletic sport. I mean, hey, if breakdance can be an Olympic sport, then I think Nordic combined deserves to stay, but that's a different argument. Do you happen to know though, are some of these discussions maybe happening because of like the media and because of what the money they can bring in? Is that where these decisions are being made?
Yeah. And I think on different levels, you know, I've heard that on the IOC level, it's literally just scheduling. It's them having, you know, they have ski jumping facilities and they have cross country facilities, and then they have the sport that is using both of those facilities, and they're adding disciplines and different events for ski jumping and for cross country. And so it makes their schedule, all of a sudden they have to add women's Nordic combined in. There you have 4 more additional events that you're going to have to use these facilities. And I've heard that is a concern of theirs, which
they should go the Steamboat adult hockey route and just make these competitions happen at 10 o'clock at night.
Totally. Exactly. Who cares?
Give them the worst schedule.
Who cares when it happens?
I mean, how many swimming events are there in a pool, and it's all the same pool? It seems like you can figure this out.
Totally.
I don't know, but
however, those events are, a couple minutes to maybe a half an hour.
yeah. Now, I mean, you're still involved in the Winter Sports Club here, and my son, he's 11 years old, and he's got some friends that are competing in Nordic combined at that level. And I was watching a video the other night of one of them jumping, and I was blown away. Like, wait a second, like, I didn't even know you could get enough speed as a 12-year-old to have the inertia to go that far. I mean, we have some really great athletes still coming up. What do you say as someone that's been through it to those athletes as they're kind of looking at this and thinking, well, man, I don't know, is this something that will be there for me by the next Olympics or the Olympics after that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think for those athletes, I mean, they, like I did, they have great role models. Like, if you look at the athletes on the World Cup now, Nicholas Malasinski and Annika Malasinski, and, we have these great athletes that are representing the sport, fighting for the sport, and competing for the sport right now. And so I think that I would tell them to trust in that and follow that pathway, because it's whatever happens, there's going to be good that comes out of it, and the sport's not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's just hitting turbulence. And so, don't let that affect your day to day, because you're doing what you love.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. And I think that's the thing about the Winter Sports Club in general is it produces Olympic level athletes, but I mean, if you actually looked at the percentage of athletes that end up being Olympians, it's a super small level. But if you look at the percentage of athletes that come out of the Winter Sports Club and go do awesome things out in the world because they learned life lessons through sport, that's what we're going after, right? The Olympics that's a bonus, but you're not. None of it's a waste of time. Is kind of my point being.
Can I ask, and this may be a naive question as well, but is it similar to, say, I don't know, international cycling, where the Olympics are there every 4 years, it's an honor, it's a privilege, but really the people that are destined to become world-class cyclists, they're in it for the large tours, the sponsor money. Is that back end, maybe not in the US, but have you seen it over in Europe, where some of the motivation for these younger athletes is not so much, okay, the Olympics may or may not be there, but the reality is you could go World Cup, you can go international, and still do what you love to do and compete, but for other reasons maybe. Is that fair?
Totally. Yeah, and America has such a different culture around the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting. I remember realizing this when I was talking to a friend of mine from the Czech Republic. She was a Nordic skier, and she came and skied in America at CU Boulder. And this is how I knew her. And she was telling me that she had made the Olympics. She had actually made the Czech team for, I forget what Olympics it was. And people were telling her that she shouldn't go because she wasn't gonna win a medal. So there was kind of no point in going over there and doing the whole thing, and it was gonna mess up the rest of her season, right? And so there's a very different perspective over there on what is the importance of the Olympics in the scheme of these sports. For American skiing, without the Olympics, we really lose our crowd, right? Because that's when people in America watch skiing. Mm-hmm. And I think in Europe it's so different because people are watching skiing every weekend. If you don't go to the Olympics, it's just another competition, with heavy metals. But at the end of the day, you're going to be back on Eurosport the next weekend and people will be watching you. But that is kind of all of these American athletes, 3 weeks of relevance, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just the way our media works. Yeah. And so, I think that it's totally possible to have these sports exist without the Olympics, but I think it's harder in America because that there is such a heavy weight on the media that comes out of that.
Yeah. Now, you obviously grew up here in Steamboat, and it's a very small, tight-knit local community like we've talked about. How important of a role does that small local community have to sustain this sport moving forward compared to kind of getting it on a bigger national scene like we're talking about, trying to get more people to watch it? But just in the local grassroots level, what can people do?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing locally here is I've just been saying, like, having discussions and trying to think about, like, what memories do you have of this sport? Have you been down to Howelsen? Have you watched it? When's the last time you went down to Howelsen and watched ski jumping? Or, you know, when you have friends into town, like, go watch. I mean, it's pretty amazing what's going on down there at 4:00 on a Tuesday. You know, you're watching, like you said, 12-year-old kids flying 100 meters through the air. Like, where else can you go do that? You know, there's not a lot of communities that have ski jumping in America, and so it's something that really, like, it's really unique about our town. And so, yeah, like, I think on the grassroots level, it's just connecting with the sport, or, you know, remembering, like, what are the ways you've connected with it in the past. And you know, the Winter Sports Club is the largest Nordic combined program in the world as far as numbers go. They have a huge program of athletes down there. And in Europe, you know, it's a lot of small little clubs spread out all over the place. But if you look at the numbers, like, we produce so many athletes in Nordic combined, whether it's just the kids doing ski mice or on the younger level that are, like, getting exposure to that sport. And we'll always remember and be able to say, like, oh yeah, I grew up, I jumped off those jumps once upon a time. So yeah, like, I think within the community, I'd love to get back to having competitions here. There's a lot of steps involved in doing that to get athletes to come back and start competing here. But I think that would be a huge step, is to have some competitions and be able to, like, reignite the community and remind them that, like, hey, this sport exists, and, you know, it's a huge part of our history, and it's pretty awesome to watch. So yeah, I think that just engaging with it. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the biggest points that you made that hits me is we have the most numbers of people in Nordic combined, and the small percentage that are actually going to make it to the Olympics, or maybe even to the U.S. ski team. But what you learn outside of that, I was a competitive skier, I was a mogul skier, and I knew all along I wasn't going to make it to that level, but I learned dedication, I learned work ethic, I got a lot of networking out of it. In fact, I always say I wouldn't have gotten a job in the radio business if it weren't through a network of people I met through skiing, actually. And so you've gone on from being an Olympic level skier now to being into real estate here in the Steamboat Springs area. Can you talk a little bit about the background of skiing and what you learned through all of that training that now helps you in your professional life?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think it's it still pays off. Like, every day I'm using the things I learned growing up here in the Winter Sports Club. You know, it's being accountable. It's, you know, showing up every day and knowing that, like, consistently showing up is the most important thing in getting to your goals, right? And just also being in a team environment and being down at Howelsen Hill, which is just like this community place, and you're so entwined in it. I think it really taught me, like, the importance of community. And you know, that's really why I moved back here, and why I do what I do. It's just, like, that community involvement is, I just thrive on it. I love being a part of what's going on in our town. And, you know, I really learned that, like, growing up down in Howelsen. So yeah, I mean, I think it's sports. There's a reason why we all love sports, and it's a great way for kids to get their energy out, you know, outside of recess at school. But it's also, like, you can learn so much through them, as we all know.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you're someone that grew up here in Steamboat. You've represented Steamboat on the international stage, and now you're back here helping other people find their Yampa Valley dreams. And we've talked a lot about community, but is there anything that just like through it all, from childhood to now helping other people learn more about this community, what is it that is just so unique from traveling all over the world about this place that you love and you love to share?
Yeah, totally. You know, they say like, if you grew up here, you got to leave, right? Just to see what else is out there. And when I left, you know, I was basically traveling around ski towns all over the world. And I couldn't help but just compare every place I went to our little town. And I think like the more and more I traveled, the more I realized like there's nowhere like Steamboat. And I tried to figure out like what is it about Steamboat that just separates it from all these places. And to me, and this is just my personal experience, is it's Howelsen. It's the Winter Sports Club. It's having a community ski resort downtown that has free skiing on Sundays, you know, where every kid goes to learn to ski, a place where people that maybe can't afford to ski up at the ski resort can go be involved in the sport that, you know, our community revolves around, you know, for 6 months of the year. And I always say, like, you know, in other places, you know, where the traditional sports are football, basketball, whatever it may be, you know, it's like this team trains at this facility at this time and this facility at this time. What makes Howelsen so special is that no matter what sport you're doing, you're down there at 4 p.m. or what age you are. You're down there at 4 p.m. on Tuesday after school. And so it brings everybody together. All the parents are down there. The kids are down there. You know, no matter what sport you're doing, you're seeing your buddies off doing something else. And there's just this connected atmosphere down there that I have never seen anywhere else. It's like Field of Dreams under the lights. It's unbelievable. And I tell people all the time, you know, and I see people come into town that are interested in living in Steamboat, and they don't know anything about Howelsen. And I'm like, oh, if you want to live here now, go down there on a Tuesday night and you'll just be mind blown. Like, you're going to see all these kids doing these crazy things, and you're going to see so many people smiling and all this interaction, and like,
and it's -10.
Yeah, and there's kids without hats on that aren't even cold. Like, it's insane. And so yeah, like, to me, that is what separates Steamboat from anywhere else. Is having that Howelsen Hill, and it's the greatest city park in the world as far as I'm concerned.
So real quick, funny story, a memory you had brought up. You said memories and that. And when the World Cup used to compete here, I remember I was a volunteer one year, and my job was basically, they had a tent, the waxing tent.
Yep.
And my job was to basically be in there at like 11 at night and spend the night, because the teams would come in and their team managers, you know, equipment managers would wax like 6 different pairs of skis for the next day, based on, they didn't know what the snow was going to be like for every team member. So you got to imagine this whole tent filled with skis, and my whole job, and I felt so special. I felt like this is it, man. I made it. I had to babysit the skis. I was the security guy, so no one could mess with the skis overnight, because who knows? And I remember sleeping. It was basically cold, and it was essentially outdoors, although I was in a tent.
Were they more worried about someone taking them or another team coming in and sabotage?
They never really told me my exact role. They just said, you have to sleep here tonight. Make sure nobody comes in. And I felt like I was, behind the magic curtain.
You were. They don't let many people in those.
No, that's it. I didn't do a background check or anything. Maybe I was the bad guy for all they knew. Oh, you're from Europe? You know, / I don't know. But it was just, I felt so cool.
That's awesome. The wax tent. Yeah, there's
wax security is a big deal.
There's a lot of secrets in the wax tent. Totally.
I'm sure. Well, I know as a parent myself, I've always thought this, and Dave, we've had these conversations, like raising kids in this community, like it is such a special place. They won't be able to appreciate it until they're many years away, even if they stay here, you know, as they probably finally we'll get to a place where, like, man, I realize how lucky I am to grow up here, having skiing right outside your back door on a Tuesday night down at Howelsen. I mean, my kids are down there all the time.
Yeah.
And I competed out of the Winter Sports Club. It's special to my heart, and it's been great being able to chat with you about your experiences growing up here, still living here, but also kind of what Nordic Combined means to the community, to you, and what we can do to help it moving forward. So thank you very much, Ben.
Absolutely.
Just another
Thanks
common folk of the boat.